a serial entrepreneur or multiple business owner. So I run a few different businesses, primarily in the events and entertainment sector. So that's a social enterprise where I work with young kids in performing arts. I also run a children's brand and salon, as well as doing events. But I also help entrepreneurs with their personal brand and publicity. So I'm a personal branding and publicity coach. So I work with entrepreneurs to get them visible, to get them press coverage, to help them secure their own press coverage, and help them build and monetize their personal brands.
Yeah, fantastic. And so obviously, if we look at media as a whole at the moment, you've obviously got very traditional media, TV, newspaper, radio. But obviously in the last, what it was sort of 10 to 15 years or so, we've had the kind of establishment of social media and other digital platforms. Obviously, a big thing with social media is that it's self-publishing. You can control the narrative, which is partly why so many have used it so much. With it being self-publishing and self-driven, is traditional media still important for entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Jonathan, when you said self-publishing, because anybody can go out and open a social media account today and produce anything they like, whether it's accurate or inaccurate. And everybody's a self-made millionaire. Everybody has Ferraris. Everybody's an entrepreneur. Everybody has Rolexes. Everybody's lives are absolutely wonderful and all of that good stuff. However, with traditional media, whether it's print or TV, to some extent, they have a duty of care to do their due diligence. And if you are featured in traditional media, then it's likely that that media outlet have done their due diligence, have done their checks, and therefore makes you credible, makes you a credible source. It's very unlikely that a traditional form of media, i.e. whether it's TV or press or news or whatever it is, are going to put you on their program and not validate what you do or what you've done. And those might be a few checks, like looking on Companies House, maybe checking, asking a few about your testimonials, or looking at some of your client base, some of your history stuff. Like they have to. I mean, I'm always on Good Morning Britain, or I do a lot of talks around on different media platforms, and I'm in press, and I've done this, that, and everything else, and the rest. And they have to do their due diligence. They have to ratify what you say, and they have to ratify your background, your business, and all of that good stuff. So it makes you a credible source, which is why you'll see a lot of entrepreneurs put as seen on ITV, as seen on Good Morning Britain, as seen in the Guardian or what have you, because as part of their process, as part of the promise that the press makes for, they have to do their due diligence to fact check it all.
Yeah, fantastic. And so do you think that actually if you are able to, as you say, get onto Good Morning Britain, ITV, Sky, whatever it is, and like you said, is a validation, do you think that in turn helps to support the self-published aspect of your social media, and kind of it actually supports that avenue as well?
Of course. And I'm not going to go as far as saying the two are intrinsic, but what I will say is that you will see a influx on your social media channel. You will see a lot more people following you, a lot more people kind of relating to you, and part of that is because you've now become a credible source. You've now been validated in some ways. Not to say that the press validates you, and I don't want people to go away and think, you need press to be validated, but it really does help reinforce your offer, and really does help give you that credibility. So, of course, along with credibility comes following, comes trust, and comes where more people will gravitate towards you.
Yeah, excellent. And at risk of kind of it becoming a kind of chicken and egg scenario, but obviously we've talked about that one kind of plays into the other. Do you think that you need to be social media famous, let's say, before you kind of reach into that traditional space?
Absolutely not. And I think this is where a lot of entrepreneurs get really confused. They get really caught up on their followings and vanity metrics, and we know of late the whole influencer term has taken on a whole new meaning, And all you really need to do now to be an influencer is to have thousands and thousands of followers who are just there and don't mean anything. However, you could have a small and mighty audience and be just as influential. And I'm going to say that again now, as an entrepreneur, we want to aim to be influential and not necessarily an influencer. And I'm going to say it again. As an entrepreneur, we want to be influential and not an influencer. Please, for the love of God, don't get caught up on the vanity metrics. Don't get caught up on how many people are following you. Don't get caught up in this Instagram lifestyle, because actually what you'll find is some of these influencers who have thousands and thousands, if not millions of followers, can't get them to buy a thing because they're not fans, they're just followers. Whereas as successful entrepreneurs who have really strong personal brands, you've turned those followers into fans because they know, like, and trust you. You're giving value. You're being trusted. You're being validated. You're more credible, and you could have a small audience but deliver larger outcomes.
Yeah, and so is it a case of like you said, having that kind of being influential? Is it a case of how do I word it? That having that following, being influential on that self-publishing space will help to kind of reach into the traditional aspect. So I'm not, not suggesting that to have X number of followers, but just to kind of have that base, that real, like you said, quality engaged community.
Yeah, and to answer the question, no, it won't help. I mean, don't get me wrong, having thousands of followers, looks great if you're that way inclined, if you're really concerned about those vanity metrics. But that's not what the press are looking at. The press are looking at the value that you've got on your page. So you could have thousands of followers, but you're not showing your knowledge and expertise around your subject area. The press will not look at you. You can have a small audience, but you're showing your knowledge and expertise in your specific industry. Then the press will be like, oh, this person's interesting. This person can speak about this topic on our platform, or we can interview this person on our platform because he's influential, his audiences are engaged, and he knows his or her stuff. So therefore, we are going to interview them or bring them on or feature them or what have you. But it's not about the large audience. The press are more looking at the content that's on your page than the amount of following. The amount of following is actually secondary. Anybody can go out there now and buy 1 million followers. And look at me, I've got 1 million followers that I've just brought. Doesn't mean anything. And it doesn't mean anything to press either.
Yeah, and so in terms of the you mentioned there the content, we're in an age where content is king. Everyone's got a story to tell about themselves, about their brand, about their story. But when you are pitching to media outlets, when you're trying to get that space on traditional media, how do you make yourself stand out? Because, like I said, everyone's got the story to tell.
Yeah. You know what, Jonathan? The thing is, you've really got to understand the type of media coverage that you want. I think that's first and foremost. So typically there's 2 different types of media coverage. So there's a feature where you are featured and they're going to feature your brand and you as a business and as a person, and maybe look at your story. So where you've come from, blah, 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 and all what you've triumphed and so forth. So you can have a feature, but then you can also be a contributor. So you're very knowledgeable in your subject area and something's happened in the news and they want to speak to somebody about that. So the hospitality sector was hit quite dramatically, as we know, with COVID. They might look for somebody who runs a restaurant or somebody who works in the hospitality sector to speak on behalf of the hospitality sector. So there's 2 different types of media coverage. You want to choose which one you want, and then that's what you want to go for. However, when you're being featured, there is a lifespan to that. There's only so much times you can tell your story again and again, and they can feature your product or your brand or you in the media. So what you want to do is be featured. And this is how I started. I was featured first, and everything was gravy, and I was in all these newspapers, but then I created relationships with the media to then transition from being a feature to now being a frequent contributor. So when they're speaking about business or when they're speaking about family or anything that connects with my personal brand, they call me to speak or give advice or to be a spokesperson around that subject. And that's the sweet spot for entrepreneurs. That's how we stay visible. That's how we stay on everybody's lips, and we're reminding everybody about who we are and what we do, because we're constantly being called to contribute to a certain discussion or conversation about our industry, what that our brand sits in.
Yeah, and so do you think that it's a case of like the story, the feature is kind of your initial hook into the space, and then it's the contribution that is the kind of almost like the recurring revenue type thing.
Yeah, everybody has a story to tell. You know, every single body has a story to tell, but it's how you tell that story that resonates. And if there's one thing that we leave this call with today, is it's not about how the story makes you feel. It's not even about how the story makes the journalist feel or the media outlet. It's about how the story makes the audience feel. So you've got to put yourself in the audience's shoes. You know, are the audience inspired, moved, motivated? Do they want to smile? Do they feel happy? Do they feel sad? What does your story do to the audiences? And that's how you have to pitch your story. So you may have a really, really great story, but if you're not pitching it so the audience feels something, then the news outlets will not pick it up. Always think audiences first. Audiences first. How can we motivate, inspire, or make the audiences feel something? And generally, you know, you have your few angles of, you know, the rags to riches, or, you know, come out of adversity and look at this person now, or the first. That's always a great angle. If you're the first to do something, the first, you know, person of color to do something, the first woman to do something, or the first to open something or to do a brand, then that's a great way to get featured also.
Yeah, and so how do you think that the approach differs in terms of pitching for feature and contribution, that kind of initial conversation?
So I think the approaches differ quite a lot. So I mean, it's quite difficult when you're approaching a press agency or media outlet to be a feature, if you like, and not try and position yourself first, because you know you want that feature. So you have to think about how that impacts the audiences. When you're being a contributor, I think it's slightly different and probably slightly easier, because you know you're doing the media outlet a favor. You know, the media outlet needs your advice, they need your expertise, they need your knowledge in this subject area. You know, that because they don't know it, you know, they need you. You have to be there to fill their segment, to fill their newspaper article. So so it's slightly different. It's slightly easier to be like, okay, I know my stuff in this area. I want to speak about this in this area, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and something you just touched on in your previous answer, actually, about what it makes the audience feel. Is that where kind of the planning, the preparation, the targeting comes into it? That actually identifying, because I from a lot of conversations that I've had with entrepreneurs over the years, their kind of strategy is, there's so many media outlets, I'm just going to try and get on any of them. Whereas, do you think it's actually better to focus on, right, this one has got this type of audience, that's the one that's perfect for my story?
Absolutely. You know, where are your audiences? What are your audiences reading, watching, listening? And that's where you'll find that your story would resonate with the journalists more, because of their audiences would respond to it more. And I think it's so important that you understand the type of coverage that you want. I have a lot of clients come to me and say, "Oh, True, you know, I want to get on Forbes," and I'm like, "Well, why do you want to be on Forbes? I mean, is it because Forbes is the main hit list? You know, why do you want to be on Forbes?" And I'm like, and they're like, "Oh, because, you know, it's because, you know, everyone's on Forbes." And no, are your audiences there? Is it the right type of, you know, magazine for you to be featured in as an entrepreneur, or even for your brand? And, you know, just as an example, I remember when I launched my first salon, the UK's first kids salon, Candy Girl UK, amazing. So I won an award from the Great British Entrepreneur for it. And it was just an amazing business, and it is an amazing business. And I remember putting out the first article, writing the first press release, and sending it to a local paper. And initially, I knew straight away that this article was made for tabloids. My business model was made for tabloids. Why? Because tabloids, you either like it or you don't. Like, it's quite, everyone's got an opinion one way or the other. But I knew that people who wouldn't like my salon won't like it. But I knew that the people who would like it would love it and would ride with it and would part with their money for it. And I knew that tabloids for this particular product was the way forward. So of course we got into, the Sun, the Daily Mail, the Mirror. So all the major tabloids ran articles on me and this salon because it felt like it was the right fit. And also, of course, you've got mass audiences that read these tabloids. So that just massively impacted our brand, impacted our customers, introduced us to a whole new customer base as well, and introduced us to a whole new following base as well. So it really, really, really is important that you decide, if you are going for print, what type of print that do you want to go for? Do you want to go for tabloids, or do you want to go for broadsheets, or do you want to go for the magazine type prints? Or alternatively, if you are going for TV, what kind of TV do you want to do? Do you want to do, daytime TV? Do you want to do the news? Do you want to do question time? Good Morning Britain and, let's say, This Morning are very, very different. So Good Morning Britain, typically you go on, you debate with somebody else, you have an opinion versus an opinion. Whereas This Morning is very much, I'm going on to share my story. I'm going to sit down on the couch with Holly and Phil or whoever it is. That's, so you have to decide what type of program fits my brand, what type of news fits my brand, and where are my audiences, and then do it that way.
Yeah, excellent. And something you mentioned at the start of that answer there about that your first press release went to a local paper. Do you think that local, I was going to say press, but local media is often overlooked in this space in trying to get yourself out there?
Local is a great place to start. I always say, garner your local relationships first when it comes to press, because they'll be more inclined to feature you because you're a success story from the city of which they belong. And everybody roots for their own city. We're all territorial. So honestly, local is a great place to start. And if your story is good enough, and if your brand is great enough, then it will be picked up by national sources as well. But you start with local first.
Yeah, I guess obviously it's to an extent dependent on what the business is and what the story is. But for something like Candy Girl, that was a local salon, that having that local element, they're the people that are going to be coming in. Okay, you might have some interest from further out, but in terms of the ones that are actually going to convert to customers, are going to be that local base.
Absolutely, 100%. Always start local. Always start local. Garner those relationships at local level first, and then you can start moving more national.
Yeah, and something that I want to touch on was obviously traditional media is TV, it's print, magazine, radio. How does the pitch, how does the approach change depending on which one you're going for?
So they actually differ quite a lot. And again, it does depend on the relationships that you have with some of these journalists. But if I was pitching to go on TV, for example, which I do quite a lot of, then you would see on my social media, first and foremost, that there are videos of me talking about certain topics. There are videos of me being articulate. There are videos of me being passionate. There are videos of me being quite direct, because that is what journalists want to see. They want to see you in the light that you are going to be discussing in, if that makes sense. So they want to see a living example of you doing what they're going to bring you on their platform to do. And of course, when you're pitching to them, there might be a story, there might be something that's happening in the media, there might be, something that you think, oh, I'm qualified enough to speak on this, and then you'll kind of find the journalist and say, hi, I saw this that's happening in the media. I really think I've got a strong opinion on this. Look at, look at what I had to say earlier on my Instagram post, and send a link and be like, I would love to contribute, or whatever the case, to this conversation. Whereas if it's print, then it would differ slightly, because rather than speaking about it, you're saying you've got an opinion on this, and this is my quote, or this is a press release that I've written, blah, 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 blah. Here you go. And hopefully it gets picked up that way. But there are different approaches to different media outlets, and particularly if they've got different audiences, you do have to tailor it. I wouldn't send the same press release to, I don't know, the Mirror that I would send to the Guardian. You change the language, you change the headline, you change the angle slightly, but the story kind of stays the same. And because it suits different publications.
Yeah, and so you've made your first appearance, or whether it's on TV or on radio or print. Obviously, a large part of it is the quality. If you go on TV for the first time and you're bumbling and you're stumbling over your words and you're terrible, they're probably not going to want you back. But your first appearance is a success. What is the most important in then maintaining that relationship?
Oh my goodness me. Relationship building with journalists is the most important thing. It's so important. And how do you do that? You can do that through connecting with them on social media. I mean, when I first went on Good Morning Britain, people think, oh, you dart for the presenters, the Susanna Reeds, the Piers Morgans, but actually they're not the decision makers as such. They're the presenters. You need to be speaking to the researchers, the producers, and all this information you can find, when to watch the credits on one of the shows, and it will come up, and you can start noting down who these people are. They'll have a relatively low following on social media in comparison to some of the bigger names that you'll see. So it's easier to strike relationships with them on social media. Right now, I have quite a lot of producers and researchers that follow me on social media. I think it's hell of important that they follow me. Why? Because I use my social media as a platform to demonstrate my knowledge and expertise around certain subjects and issues and stuff like that. So when an issue does arise and they think, oh, who would be great for this? Because they're following me, they know that they can pitch me because they've seen me speak about it. They've seen me have an opinion about it. They've seen me write about it. So they're like, actually, we're going to call Tree for this because he is what we need for this. And I can't stress it enough around making sure that you have content that sings to what you do and how you do it. I was on Good Morning Britain yesterday morning. Was it yesterday morning? Or the morning before? Might have been, I can't remember when. Yesterday or the morning before. And that came about from a single blog post that I wrote in 2017 when I ran my wedding company. So I ran a wedding company around events and weddings, and I remember writing a blog post about my anniversary and about my marriage and what it was like getting married and so forth. And I put that out in 2017. We're now in 2022, and one of the researchers from Good Morning Britain phoned me and was like, "True, we've just read your blog post on getting married. We want to do a debate in the morning with Trisha Goddard about the remarriage and, whether you lose, interest or the sanctimoniousness of remarriage." I'm not going to go in and out of the debates, and I care not whoever you for it or against it. But the fact is, I was called to do that debate because when I was running my wedding company, I was writing a lot of blogs around marriage and my thoughts on it. And it was very clear that I had an opinion on getting married once and, and all of this great stuff, and you live happily ever after. And because I had that opinion, because it was written in a blog, there was like, we want to tease this from True a bit more and go out there. So blog writing is a great way. And just to reinforce actually blog writing, that was actually the first ever time that allowed me to go on Good Morning Britain was through another blog post for Candy Girl. And just to be really, really quick on this, it was 2018, I believe it was, my first appearance, and there was an article in the Sun around Victoria Beckham taking her daughter Harper, who was 9 years old at the time, to the spa, and they both was having spa treatments. And I remember just launching Candy Girl probably a few months before, and it was interesting because the Sun put that article out, and on Facebook, you know how it goes. Everyone's having their comments, and it's like an echo chamber, and everyone's saying, "Oh, this is disgusting. Victoria Beckham's irresponsible. She's growing her daughter up too quick. Blah blah blah." So I obviously, of course, I've got Candy Girl. So I went away and within an hour, wrote a blog about five reasons why it's important for young kids to be pampered. It takes a device out of their hands. They feel special. It's harmless fun, blah, blah, blah. And then I went back onto the Sun article on Facebook and I put it on there and it says, "You guys are morons," for want of a better word, like, read this blog. And within an hour, one of the Sun editors contacted me to say, "Oh my God, that was amazing, Reed. We really want to interview you, blah, blah, blah." So I said, "That's fine." So they did an interview on me. They did an interview on the salon. It came out on the Sun on Sunday. It was a double page spread, which was absolutely surprising. But not only that, it had like Victoria Beckham and Harper, and it made it look like they were in the salon, and they really wasn't. But I wasn't complaining because it was fantastic for the brand. But then that was on the Sunday. On the Monday, Good Morning Britain called me to say they've seen it on the Sunday in the paper. Can I come on Tuesday to discuss the brand and what we're doing? Literally from a blog post. I can't stress enough. So that's already two appearances on GMB, and I know I've done dozens on there, but 2 appearances on GMB from a blog post. If you're not writing blogs around your brand and around your subject area to highlight your experience and expertise, if you are serious about getting in the media, that's something you want to start and putting in your strategy. So important. It's crucial.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful example. And I guess just going off what you've said there, do you think that obviously in the past few years, video has become so big, particularly on social? Do you think that actually that kind of what is almost seeming like an older skill and kind of older platform of written content, do you think that's kind of being forgotten a little bit in this sense?
Oh, of course. There's not. Video is almost like it's taken over, and of course I do both. I do video and blog writing, but I write because I enjoy writing, and I feel like I can say what I want to say more in a written format. But often I repurpose my content, I repurpose my blog writing, so I can then put it in a video in a 60-second reel, or I can then put it in a, in some kind of format in a TikTok video or something like that where it's repurposed. Whereas if, for example, a journalist doesn't want to read it, then they can still see a summarized version in a video. But blog writing is a great way to start the content off, because then you can repurpose that in many ways, shapes and forms.
Excellent. Just a couple more before we go on to some questions from the audience. I know you mentioned the really, really great piece of advice of just simply watching the credits of certain TV programs to pick out producers' names and things like that. There are platforms that journalists use, and producers and editors and researchers use to kind of effectively kind of give a call out to say, we're looking for this. Is that something you recommend versus kind of building the relationships in the first instance?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how you start to build the relationship. So if you're not on Twitter, like, that's the space, that's where journalists live, that's where they hang out, that's where they get their information, their knowledge. You need to be on Twitter. There's a hashtag that they often use, which is journal requests. That's hashtag journal request, JOURNO request, all one word. And they often put out requests when they need a spokesperson or to interview somebody in a certain realm or what have you, in a certain industry or field, and they use that hashtag quite regularly. And it literally is simply, if they put out a request that resonates with you and you think that you're qualified and experienced to speak on that, you can just reply to that and say, hi, I can do that. This is what I do. If you want to conversate about this more, feel free to drop me a follow, so I can DM you and then get the conversation going that way. But that's a great way to understand and to get your foot in the door with journalists and start building those relationships.
Excellent. And like I said, just a one or two more from me before we go on to the audience ones. I'd be interested to know, are there any types of coverage that you warn your clients to be wary of? Any kind of experiences where they've said, oh, I've been approached for this, or oh, I'm going to try and go for this, and your immediate, alarm bells are ringing for, it could have this consequence?
Absolutely. Personally, and this is just me, I do not believe you should pay for coverage. And there are a lot of, people out there who would DM you and say, oh, if you, pay me however many $100, I can get you in, I don't know, Yahoo Finance, for example, as one of the top 10 entrepreneurs to watch, and all of this, and AOL this. And I absolutely hate those platforms, because if something is newsworthy, you shouldn't have to pay for it. And I'm going to say it again, if something is newsworthy, you shouldn't have to pay for it. You are doing these newspapers and these media outlets a favor by giving your story, by giving your brand, by giving, your expertise and knowledge. They have to fill their newspapers, they have to fill their TV segments. They're not doing you a favor. As an entrepreneur and a business owner, you are doing them a favor. So you're not going to do them a favor and pay for the favor that you're doing for them at the same time. I just believe that it's a little bit disingenuous to pay for a rating as Yahoo's Finance #1 or #2 or top 10. Like those type of things, I would say stay away from, because it will put your brand in disrepute. It will make people question your credibility. It's kind of like buying followers or paying for an award, or like those type of things, those short wins. I think if you are going to earn that coverage, then earn it through the quality of the brand and not pay for it. So that would be my only advice. Be really wary of those organizations or media outlets that come to you and say, if you pay for this, we can get you X, Y, Z. I would question those things.
Yeah, and I suspect that that's going to form a little bit of the answer of the next question. I was going to ask, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen entrepreneurs or clients make with trying to get media coverage? Whether it's trying to develop their brand or getting into media. What are some of the biggest mistakes?
So the biggest mistakes are not knowing the type of media coverage that they want. Number one, you've got to be research and understand the type of media coverage and where your audiences are. Also, when connecting with journalists and trying to build relationships, they're just asking for, quick wins for themselves. With journalists, you have to nurture those relationships. You have to, not go in for the ask straight away. So it might mean that one day you might find a journalist and be like, oh, hi, I really liked what you did with this article. Maybe pick out a line and say, I particularly like the fact that you had an opinion or said this and this reporting. So you're showing an interest, commenting on their articles, on their blogs that they write, or on some of their TV segments, creating that relationship on Twitter. Doing all of that groundwork first before you go in for the ask. So when you do finally go in for the ask, they are like, oh, okay, this person's been quite nice to me over the last few weeks. That's fine. I'm going to consider it in a bit more detail rather than just seeing a name pop up in your inbox and being like, who are you, type of thing. So so that for me is like one of the biggest blunders that entrepreneurs make. Also, be press ready. Do not go on or try and secure press coverage if you are not press ready. What do I mean by being press ready? Number one, making sure that you've got press images. So take those professional images and put them in a folder, a Google Drive that's ready to be emailed off to press if they need it, because they really don't have the budget to be trying to secure a photographer to come to you and take some decent images. Number two, making sure that your, social media profiles are public and not private. News is here today and gone tomorrow. If you miss your chance, you're out. If they're waiting for you to accept so they can see what you do and blah, it's too long. Making sure that you're really public, making sure that you've got content that demonstrates your knowledge and expertise on your platforms, whether that's through a blog, whether that's through the content that you're doing on Instagram or your social media, whether that's through Twitter, have stuff there and content that's ready available so the press can have confidence in securing you for their platform. So those would be the things that I would say make sure that you have before you even go and start pitching.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So like I said, we've had a few audience questions, so I'll move on to them. So the first one comes from Kate, who says, I do the marketing for an organization and the CEO is the expert. How do you suggest I make the organization the leader in the industry? It doesn't say which industry it is, as well as the entrepreneur, and do both. I know my boss is very short on time, so I know her having her own brand or platform outside of the kind of organization bubble is limited. So kind of any advice on positioning both the business and the entrepreneur as kind of leaders in the field?
I think, Kate, you answered your own question. Your boss needs to see it as a priority. They need to see the personal brand just as important as the business brand, because they will be both intrinsic, and you need to work with them. You need to work at them, simultaneously. And, the business brand would always be that visual identity that people connect with, and that's great. But the personal brand, your boss's brand, should be the knowledge and expertise around the area to position them as an expert around the area that the business brand sits in. And I think that's going to be the important factor. And once your boss starts to demonstrate that knowledge, expertise, and that might be through the content that they offer online, that might be through winning awards, that might be through writing blogs, writing books, anything that will position them as an expert in that field. That's when the press will start to gravitate to them, because they will be considered as the go-to expert. But the press would never gravitate to them if they cannot see that this person is a specialist in their field and is the person that they need to speak with around the topic that their brand sits in, or around the industry that their brand sits in. So you've got to find time for both. You've got to find time to build both brands simultaneously.
Brilliant. I'm not sure if you saw the comment there from Kate. She thought that might have been the answer that you were coming out with. So yeah, thank you for that. A really interesting one from Kirsty, who asks, is the role of a PR consultant, or I guess PR agency, dying out then if we can do all of this ourselves?
Absolutely not. Some people want to use PR agencies. I've used PR agencies before simply because I don't have the time and the effort to secure press coverage. Press coverage is a long, tedious game. And sometimes if you don't have the time and the energy, outsource it. I would never ever say don't use PR agencies or press agencies, because they also know their stuff, and they also can help you, particularly if you are time short, and particularly if you're trying to work on your brand and your personal brand and you don't physically have the resource or the time to work on securing press coverage. Use PR agencies, validate those PR agencies. So look at their testimonials, look at their past clients, look at the stuff that they've been doing, because there are a lot of PR agencies out there that just don't know what they're doing. But equally, there's a lot that do, and there's a lot that can help you. So I'm not against PR agencies at all. I like to teach entrepreneurs to do it themselves.
Excellent, thank you. There's another question from Gary, but I think we actually covered that when we discussed, watching the credits, looking for the names of the researchers. So that's covered. Excellent. It's actually another one from I think it's the same Kirsty. Yes. Oh no, it's the same question. It's just moved. Sorry. So there's a question from Louis, who says that they are a student at university and wondering if traditional media is more important than social media to building relationships.
Actually, I was wondering if traditional media is more important and stuff. I think both are equally as important. The difference, as I mentioned earlier on the call, with traditional media is that it just provides that credibility and just gives you a little bit more validation. Whereas with social media, anybody can jump up or open an account and spew any old rubbish and lies, and it would never be ratified, and there's nothing to regulate it. Whereas it's slightly different with traditional media. They have to, it's more regulated.
Excellent. I think that's just about all the time we've got. Just one final one from me. What 3 key points would you like the audience to take away from today's session before we wrap up?
So be press ready, number 1. So making sure your social medias and you've got press images and you've got content that demonstrates your knowledge, etc. So being press ready. Building relationships. So looking at the hashtag journal request and going away and speaking to journalists, etc., etc. And finally, the last thing is understand the type of media that you want to be featured in or on, rather. So whether it's TV, whether it's print, and if it is, go a little bit further. What type of TV program? Is it this, daytime TV? Is it like something in the night? Is it news, etc.? And the same with print. Is it what type of print media? Is it tabloid? Is it Broad Street? Is it magazines? Is it just blog posts? Do you want to do podcast? There's so many different types of press and PR that you could do. It really is about understanding where your audiences are and where does your brand fit, and having a firm idea about that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Great way to end. Well, True, on behalf of myself and Great British Entrepreneur Awards and everyone who's joined us today, thank you so much for your time and your insight. It's been really, really, really. I was going to say insightful. It's the same word, but we'll go with it. It's been really fantastic. Loads of advice in there. And yes, like I said, thank you so much for your time. That's all we've got time for today. And with that, we'll pass back to Chloe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, True, for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us today. It's been great to have you join us. We've had lots of lovely comments in the chat function as well. I've also included a link to True's LinkedIn profile, so if you wish to connect with him, you can do that via the link in the chat. I'd also like to say thank you to our host, Jonathan Davis. John has been hosting these sessions with us since October 2020, and today is actually his last session with us before he moves on to a new role next week. So thank you, Jonathan, for interviewing our incredible entrepreneurs over the past 1.5 years. We'll be back at the same time next week with Hayes McIntyre, Mark and Christopher as they discuss, does every business need an exit plan? If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's session, we'll be sending out a replay of the recording later on today. You can find the replay and future sessions at www.lightbulb-sessions.haysummit.com. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you again, True and Jonathan.